Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing the darkest romances I've ever read. Alright guys, it has been quite a while since I put out a dark romance rec video, and over the last few months, I have read a ton of dark romance. I don't know why I've been gravitating towards that genre, but for some reason in February, I planned on reading mostly fantasy and ended up with a ton of dark romance, and I'm actually kind of happy about it because some of these books were amazing. So I have about 10 to 12 books I'm about to talk about. Now, some of them were a little too dark for me, however, I wanted to keep them on this list because if you are a fan of really dark romance, you will probably still really enjoy them. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these dark romance books. And starting off with one of my absolute favorite dark wide shoes romances, we have Heartless Heathens by Santana Knox. I read this book last year and I loved it so much. We are following Romina, and she is this girl that is being kept in isolation in a bell tower by Father Frollo, who is the head of this university and also one of the leading members of the church. So in this story, the church has essentially taken over the government and they are super powerful. Now, there are these heathens that were also raised by this guy that's very into like demon worship and all this other crazy stuff, and they want to take down this university and Father Frollo, but when they get there, they find Romina, like I said, just locked in this bell tower, and they kind of take her into their world, and it is so good. If you couldn't tell by the plot synopsis, this is inspired by The Hunchback of Notre Dame, so there are a lot of little nods to the classic tale, but this is super spicy, super dark, and it's wide shoes, and it was just so good. So check the trigger warnings, but I love this book. And next up are two books by Biel. So I will say one of them I really enjoyed. The other one was way too dark for me. So first up, we have Hitched by Biel. This is a hitchhiker romance. This girl is driving and ends up picking up this person that is stranded on the side of the road, only to find out that he is actually a convicted murderer who has escaped prison, who then takes her hostage, and it is their romance. This one was really good. I think it could have been a little bit shorter. The ending kind of goes off the rails a little bit, but overall, I really enjoyed this one. Then I read Along for the Ride, which is also kind of a hitchhiker romance. We're following these two killers that end up abducting this girl, and instead of killing her, they kind of take her on this murder spree with them, and they're into some really weird stuff, and you check all of the triggers are in this book. I don't think there's a single trigger that's not involved in this book. So it's very dark. I can't believe I finished it. I'm honestly proud of myself for finishing it. But if you read this, let me know what you think, because it was a lot. It was a lot, you guys. So anyway, loved Hitched. This one didn't really work for me. All right, so this next book is a absolute roller coaster. However, it was also one of my favorite reads of last month. Now, I do feel like it's better to go into this kind of blind, so I'll give you the synopsis that I received, but just know that this book is so much more than like dark, spicy time. It is super emotional. I did cry at one part of this book. Like, it was just so unbelievably good. And that is Duet by Nina C. Jones. Now, I will say this is available via audio. I've been wanting to read this author for a while, but most of her books, it seems, aren't available in audio format, but this one is. So definitely give it a try if you're an audiobook reader. But this is following a girl that hires someone to fulfill a fantasy of something she wants to do in the bedroom, and then that ends up occurring, but then the person that she hired ends up showing up the next night, and she realized that what happened the previous night wasn't actually the person she paid to do the thing. It was a random intruder, and the story goes from there. So that's the best I can kind of explain, but once again, it is so good. So definitely check this book out. I really enjoyed it. And next up is A Bind Up by one of my favorite authors of all time. We have the Enslaved Duet by Giana Darling. Now, I will say when I first started this book, I thought I might DNF it because the beginning is super dark. However, I'm so happy I continued because I loved this story. It also sets up, well, I don't know if it sets up because I read the books out of order, but this character is sisters to another character in another duology by Giana Darling, and then there's other characters mentioned. So overall, I just love this entire world that Giana Darling created. But anyway, we're following this girl in this book named Cosima, and she ends up being sold by her father to this British noble who is really into having a submissive, but worse than that. You guys can figure it out. So anyway, she wakes up chained to a floor, completely naked, and the story really starts off from there, and it is so good. I will say the first book is very dark. The first book is like her training, essentially, and then there's very upsetting things that happen towards the end of it, and then the second book is a lot more action and a little bit more of like the romance that ends up happening. So overall, loved this. I think I read both of these books in like 2 days. I could not stop listening, so highly, highly recommend. And I feel like I can't make a dark romance rec video without mentioning Daddy Zaid. So this is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. I love this duet. It's the cat and mouse duet. I feel like most of you guys probably know what this book is about. We are following this girl that moves into her grandmother who has recently passed away, dilapidated mansion, and soon after moving in, well, not a mansion, it's more like a dilapidated, creepy house, but soon after moving in, she starts to feel like she's being watched, and we find out she's actually being stalked by Zaid Meadows, who is a vigilante stalker, and this first book is really their romance, and him breaking into her house and them slowly kind of falling for each other. But the second book in this series is really, really dark. And I think it was McKay from Oh Hey It's McKay. There was a live show, I think it was like last year, where she was talking about how the second book probably is considered so dark because you really fall in love with the characters in this first book. So seeing the horrible things that happen to them, it just hurts even more. So I feel like the author did do a really good job of making you fall in love with both characters. But the second book deals a little bit more with like trafficking and like really, really dark stuff. So make sure you check trigger warnings before reading the second one. But overall, Haunting Adeline is one of my favorite stalker romances and deserves all of the hype. And next up, we have Still Beating by Jennifer Hartmann. So, funny story to go with this. I tried reading this when I first started BookTube. I think Jess from Peace Love Books absolutely loved this book and was raving about it. So I gave it a shot, and I was like, way too dark for me, and it actually put me off dark romance for a little bit. I reread this book in February, and easily a 5-star read, and it's probably the least dark book on this list. So just to show you how my tastes have really changed, I love everything about this book. I think the second half of this book is phenomenal, and you need the first part of this book in order to have the emotional impact you get in the second part of this book. But anyway, this is following this girl who is kind of frenemies with her sister's fiance. Like, they've known each other for a really long time. They've always really messed with each other and pulled pranks on each other. And one day she ends up calling him because she needs a ride home and her sister doesn't answer. So he shows up to pick her up from a bar. He's kind of giving her shit. And then they both end up being abducted by a serial killer and are held against their will in this basement, forced to do unspeakable things, sometimes to each other. And then the second half of the book is the aftermath of that abduction. And oh my gosh, it is so, so good. So highly recommend. It is really dark. Check trigger warnings to make sure you're comfortable, but I loved this book. And next up is actually the inspiration for this video. So I recently read Deliver by Pam Godwin, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Now, I have loved Pam Godwin's books. Sea of Ruin is one of my absolute favorites. It's also pretty dark. I probably should have included it on this list. However, the cover of Deliver is just, it looks intense. So I always kept saying, I'll read it later, I'll read it later. Anyway, circumstances forced me to have to read it now, and I ended up really enjoying it. So the story is following this girl named Liv who abducts people and trains them on how to become submissives, but against their will. Like I said, they are abducted and forced to do this, which is absolutely terrible. But anyway, she ends up abducting this boy named Josh, and right away we realize Josh is different than the other people she's abducted. He is a family guy. People will notice he's missing. He's also really religious and works on a farm, and he's just complete opposite of everyone else she's abducted. And soon we start to find out why she has taken this particular boy, and it goes from there. So I will say I was not expecting the ending of this book at all. at all. I was so confused of how this book was going to wrap up. And I also found out it is part of a 9-book series, and I will definitely be continuing because I love this first book. So yeah, if you are considering reading Deliver by Pam Godwin, I definitely think it's worth picking up. And it is dark, but not quite as dark as I was anticipating. And next up is probably the best dark romance ever written. We have Manacled by SenlinYu. I adore this book with all my heart. It was my favorite book of last year. It is available on Archive of Our Own as of now. However, I believe this was picked up by a traditionally published publishing house, so it will be coming out without any of the Harry Potter references. So I can't wait to read that. But as of now, it is available on Archive of Our Own. But this is following Hermione, and it's essentially what would have happened if Harry Potter had lost the war against Voldemort and Voldemort came into power. So Hermione has been sent to this sensory deprivation jail, and she's been staying there for years until she is taken out and presented to Voldemort, where she finds out that Voldemort has started a magical breeding program to create very powerful witches and wizards, and he is going to give Hermione to his right-hand man, his High Reeve. And we find out the High Reeve is Draco Malfoy himself. So Hermione and Draco now have to have a baby, and it goes from there. And oh my gosh, it's dark, but so good. So if you read any book on this list, please read Manacled. It is amazing. And next up, we have 2 books by Amo Jones. So first off, we have Sicko, and I read this a few years ago. I think I gave it 5 stars. It is a dark motorcycle forbidden romance between 2 foster siblings. So at the start of the book, we are following these foster siblings that obviously have a bit of a crush on each other, but then something happens. The brother ends up disappearing, and they don't see each other for years. That is until the brother pops back up at a club of ill repute and ends up almost sleeping with his sister, who is working there. And things kind of go from there, and they find out that the sister has a horrible past and horrible things have happened to her since her brother has disappeared. But her brother, now being the head of this motorcycle organization, decides he is going to save her, and the story goes from there. So this is super twisty. I feel like all of Amo Jones' books are super twisty. And Wicked is the second book I read in that series. It follows characters I believe we met in the first book, at least one of them, and has a very similar feel. I did not like Wicked nearly as much as Sicko. Not exactly sure why, because they are very similar books in a lot of ways. I feel like Wicked just had a few too many twists, and there was just a lot happening. But I love Sicko. Kind of like Wicked, I think I ended up giving it 3.5, and then Sicko I gave 5. So both are definitely worth checking out, and I want to read more Amo Jones in the future. So if there's any other really good Amo Jones books, let me know down in the comments below, because I feel like her writing is super unique. Like, I never know what is coming, and it's just, they're really good. So anyway, would love recommendations, and definitely check out Sicko. And these last 2 books, I personally was not a fan of. However, I feel like there's a lot of conversations about them in the dark romance community, so I figured I would talk about them. So first up, we have Captive in the Dark. This is following a girl that ends up being captured by this guy who is teaching her how to become the perfect submissive against her will. And I believe it's a duet. I haven't gone on and read, or I haven't read the second book in the duet just because I didn't like the first book that much. It's very dark, and it's very unsettling, so if it sounds like something you're into, give it a try. It has that whole captor-captive trope, very literally. And the other one is Tears of Tess, which is very similar to Captive in the Dark, kind of. We're following this girl that ends up going on her honeymoon with her idiot fiancé. They end up going somewhere that is very not the best place to be alone, and she ends up being kidnapped and taken against her will, where she is sold, but then is purchased by someone who seems to actually kind of care about her, but then she ends up running away and is stolen again by horrible people, and it's the romance between her and the first person that purchased her, if that makes any sense. Either way, none of those books really worked for me. I just wanted to bring them up because I see them in a lot of dark romance videos, and I figured I would share my opinion on them. I think I gave the first one, Captive in the Dark, 1.5 stars, and then Tears of Tess, I think I gave 1.75. So like I said, neither really worked for me, but if you're looking for super dark romances, look no further. Alright guys, so those are all my dark romance book recommendations. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any dark romances that I didn't mention that you want to recommend, let me know down in the comments below. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, and Leslie. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!